Hey, rookies, and welcome back to the Rookie Farmer Podcast. This is the home for all things real, honest, and raw in the world of small scale market gardening and agriculture. If you're new here, my name is Alec. I'm your host, and I'm also the grower here at Crop Culture Farm in New Bern, Georgia. And we have a little bit of a different episode this week. We'll kind of get into a little bit more of the details of what all that means in the actual interview. But this week we sit down with Chet Clayton of Hillside Harvest Farm. If you guys remember back last year, we interviewed him. He is up in Michigan growing a ton of garlic, doing all kinds of spice and herb blends and microgreens and mushrooms and a bunch of amazing stuff. And like always, I really enjoy getting to do revisited episodes and sitting down with former guests. But we kind of turned the tables this time. Chet is preparing for an upcoming talk that he's giving at a farming conference, and he had a bunch of questions that he wanted to ask me. And I thought, why not turn it into an episode? I get to blabber on a little bit more, whether you guys are here for it or not. And he had a lot of really insightful questions, getting into things like profitability, the way that we run our business. Sometimes some of the stuff that we don't really get to dig deep into in some of these episodes. And I really, really enjoyed this one. So you will get to hear me as the guest, Alec of Crop Culture Farm, and Chet is conducting this interview. But sit down and look forward to this episode with Chet Clayton of Hillside Harvest Farm interviewing me. Chet, it's so good to talk to you again, man. Once again, I'm really enjoying this about the 2026 season now that I'm getting to go back and talk to some people that we interviewed last year. And I really enjoyed our conversation. All the value added stuff
Yeah.
was really cool. But we're doing something a little different today. You have some cool opportunities coming up, and you wanted to run some questions by me. And I just thought, you know what? Like, we're always in need for more episodes, and there would be really good conversations that would come out of this conversation. And so I just thought, like, why don't we just turn this into an episode of the
Yeah.
podcast? But for the people who are listening, give us a little bit of a quick intro into who you are if they haven't caught that last episode, and what you have coming up that is sort of spurring on this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Alec, for taking the time. Yeah. So my wife and I run Hillside Harvest Farm. We're up in northern Michigan where we have 1.5 feet of snow right now. So it's nice and cold up here. We grow garlic, and then we grow different herbs. And then we do some microgreens. We do some shiitake mushrooms. Basically, our specialty, most of our sales and what we do is we actually dry our garlic and herbs and make seasonings. And so we do more value added with our products from our farm. And we're mostly a garlic farm. So we grow anywhere between 26,000 to 30,000 plants a year, and then sell those fresh and also make seasonings with them, with the herbs. So what the reason I wanted to interview you is I was really curious. So I don't do fresh veggies. I don't do like fresh greens. And I'm actually going to an agricultural conference, and I'm going to be talking to people about how to bootstrap a farm, to how to build a farm from the ground up. And I do some value added, but I don't do the greens. And you are a pro in that, and so I really want to talk to you
Ooh,
about, like,
a pro.
hey,
That's
hey, you
that's a
got
stretch.
you're getting it figured it out for sure.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to talk to you and ask you, like, ask you a few questions about that and how you built your farm and where you started from. So
Cool.
I guess, Alec, we get right into it. I'm curious, like, what inspired you to start your farm, and like, what was your background before saying, "Hey, I'm going to go all out and I'm going to go full time into this farming venture." What inspired you, and what was your background before you went all out with that?
So I would say around probably 2015, I, like a lot of people, were, spending time online, and you find documentaries or articles or things sort of talking about permaculture and sustainable agriculture, what's really in our food, those sort of things. Documentaries like Food Inc. come to mind. And you start hearing about guys like Joel Salatin
Hmm.
that are really doing something revolutionary. I guess to back up even a little bit more, I had worked on a just conventional, large scale tomato, pepper, and winter squash farm back in at the end of high school, kind of in between high school and college, that sort of gap year time. And that was sort of my only real exposure to the actual business side of agriculture other than going to a pumpkin patch or, a corn maze or whatever. And and I remember having conversations with the owner talking about like, can this organic thing really work? It was kind of already in the back of my mind, and him not really being sold on it. Obviously, for multiple generations, his family had farmed this land and had essentially done this same style of agriculture. So, that those seeds were planted way back then. That was probably 2012, and then, started gardening, started really getting into permaculture. 2017, we actually attempted, or maybe it was 16, we actually attempted to start our first little farm business. Old Town Acres was what it was called. Just a kind of an urban backyard farm in the little downtown area that we were living in. I had a couple of restaurant accounts that were interested. I was managing a coffee shop, and I was gonna sell stuff in the coffee shop. And the house got sold out from underneath us. We were renting, and
Mhm.
the owners decided to sell the house, and we were really good friends with them, so it just didn't feel right for us to stay and to do all that. So that dream never really got off the ground, but it was always there. I was always gardening, doing things like that, researching, studying, dreaming one day of having a farm. And then at about the beginning of COVID, like with a lot of people, there's massive shakeups. There's a total breaking of the supply chain. For the first time
Mhm.
in my life, I'm going into grocery stores and I'm seeing empty shelves. There's no food, there's no meat, there's no vegetables, and realizing, this is not an anti-fragile system that we have here. And I think that was a big inspiration for a lot of people. And for me, just realizing that I was not very rich in capital, I didn't have any land, any of that sort of thing. I decided to opt in the route of, well, why don't I help other people? I have all this knowledge that I've gained through gardening myself and just really passionate about it and learning. So let me just help other people. So we started a foodscaping business, tried to get that off the ground, didn't really get anywhere. Unfortunately, I think I sort of caught that at the tail end of like peak COVID hysteria, and things were kind of coming back to normal, and people were less interested in growing their own food. Store shelves were stocked again, so on and so forth. But it just kind of kept it in the back of my mind, and then just at some point had this realization, like, if I'm ever gonna do this, if I'm ever gonna start farming, I need to I need to have some sort of experience. I can't just hope and pray and dream that one day I'm gonna have land, one day I'm gonna do this. And then I ended up jumping on part-time and then ultimately full-time at an organic vegetable farm that has been killing it for, 3 decades at this point, and worked there for about 3 years. And in the end of 2023, we ended up signing the lease on the property we're on now, and really officially launched the business, yeah, end of 23 into 24. And
Okay.
so we were part-time in 24, and then in spring of last year in 25, we went full-time on the property.
Okay. Cool. So it really sounds to me like, a lot of people go, "Man, I just wanna start the farm," but you spent a decade learning all about agriculture, working for different farms, dabbling into starting a business, and then moving into another. I think that's I don't know, I just find that's really important. I think that's really important for anybody who's trying to start a farm to understand, like, you didn't start it. You didn't it's not just like, "Hey, I wanna be a farmer 2 years ago," and now you have a farm. Like, you were working on this since at least 2012, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of ebbs and flows and a lot of time to sort of have that dream be reinvigorated and then sort of die back and go on the back burner, and then vice versa. And sort of that dream and that passion was really tested over the years, so that by the time we were really ready to pull the trigger, there was no doubt in my mind that this was ultimately what I wanted to do. Obviously, it was still scary, and not knowing if we were gonna do it forever or not, which I still don't know. I mean, we're only 2 and some change years in, but after, yeah, a decade or so of mulling it over and dreaming and planning and trying and failing, yeah, I knew in 23 when we pulled the trigger on this property that it was time and we were gonna actually make it happen.
So in 23, you purchased this property, or did
We
you
signed a
purchase it,
lease
rent
on the
it?
Property.
Signed a
Yeah.
lease on the property. And then what was your biggest on top of in addition to the lease, what was your biggest startup expenses? What was you saying, "Hey, look, to start this business, we have to have these things to make a go of it."
And I would say in a lot of ways, it's an unfair advantage that I've had the opportunity that I've had, but I would also say that I was strategic in keeping an eye out. So we started looking for land, looking for properties. I didn't really know what I was looking for. Ideally, you have something with some infrastructure. We just didn't have the finances. No way did I think that we could buy a piece of property. You got to remember, I'm essentially a farmhand full time. Making 16 bucks an hour, not
Right.
really buy land salary at that point. And so, trying to be strategic about finding a property that we can lease that has some infrastructure in place. And, we got really blessed. We got connected with a landowner who had a property that had a couple of, I wouldn't say failed farms, but it was sort of a quasi farm incubator. Some people came and attempted to start farms. One didn't last. Another one has actually gone on to be really successful. And we're still friends and we sell at the same market. But so there was this property here that had a lot of infrastructure in place already. We had deer fencing, we had one small high tunnel, we had a barn, we had some rudimentary wash pack area, and there was like a small compact, 1980s John Deere tractor. So there wasn't as much of, all right, here's these pieces of infrastructure, these big investments that we need to make, as much as it was, we are going to be really choosy about where we end up. We are not going to just pull the trigger on a bare piece of land with no way to work the soil, with no way to keep the deer out, with no way to irrigate.
Right.
And so in some ways, like I said, it feels like an unfair advantage, but at the end of the day, it was a really wise strategic choice on our part to end up where we were. But as far as the first big pieces of investment that we did do, were buying in compost, investing in really good high quality seed, fertilizer, and then irrigation. We're buying drip
Okay.
tape, we're buying the manifolds, and then of course, the very first real farm purchase, I guess you could say, was, just like a really good, Glazer stirrup hoe and that thing
Okay.
still is a workhorse, gets used every day.
Yeah. If you were recommending to someone, they're looking for land, they're looking to lease, what would you recommend as far as being sure there's these things set in the contract? As far as so you don't work the land for a couple of years, build some greenhouses, and then it's not, you know, you can't even take the greenhouses with you or hoop houses, I guess. What would you recommend as far as contracts? I'm just curious with the lease, it sounds like it's
Yeah,
a
no,
great
absolutely.
it sounds like a great option. And how did that work with you as far as contract goes?
So it was a lot of just really real candid conversations with the owner. It was a lot of like, let's sit down, let's crack open a beer, and let's hash this out.
Yeah, yeah,
And talking about like, hey, if we build another greenhouse here, if I buy it, is that mine? Because if
right,
it is, I'm taking it with me if I ever leave. If
right,
not, if we're building a greenhouse and this is on your property, then we need to work out how this sort of works. Yeah, improvements to the property itself, to the infrastructure of the property that's not mobile, that sort of thing. Like, what is the expectation of that? Is it just this is a part of the lease and you're required to maintain it just in the same way that, you're somewhat required to keep up with a house if you're renting it?
mhm,
Obviously, if there's a massive thing like the AC goes out or, there's a roof leak, you're not expected to repair that. That's all covered in your lease. And so in a lot of ways it's pretty standard. It's just more nuanced because we're working with farm properties. And so for the most part, yeah, it's like if it's stuck in the ground or it's, nailed to the building, so to speak, it's
right,
not going anywhere. And that is a property investment. And if it is something that I do and that I invest into it, there's either, sort of carve outs for that. It's far as in lease payments, or it's somehow you're building equity that you'll get back one way or another. And without getting into all the minutia of what our lease actually looks like.
right,
But the
right, right,
nice
right,
thing is I'm working with a landlord who really cares. He's not trying to turn a profit off of leasing this land to me,
right,
and he's also not completely absent. Like, he wants to see us succeed, and he's continued to invest a little bit, from the very beginning in the actual business itself.
Fantastic. I mean, that sounds great. So you spent multiple years learning. You found land, found an amazing landlord, leased the property. You have the starting infrastructure. Now you're ready to go. Are you working by yourself? Do you have anybody working with you? What does that look like starting off? And what are you looking for as far as markets? Are you looking to start with multiple markets, one market?
Yeah, so for the first, I mean, really, it's kind of always been just me. So we started in October 1st of 23 was when we sort of signed the lease, and the plan was, and what we actually executed was, we are going to kind of spend the fall and winter and early spring getting things ready so that come springtime when market season starts, we've got stuff that we're harvesting, we're selling, and we're off to the races. And so I was full time up until about that first market week, and that's when I was like, I have to have at least a day off to harvest to get ready for the market.
Yeah,
And
no
and
kidding.
so
Yeah.
but for all of October, November, December, January, February, and yeah, I was, working full time at this other farm, driving 15, 20 minutes up the road, work in the dark. It's wintertime, there's not a lot of daylight left, just working, shaping beds, spending all day Saturday, half a day Sunday. And at the time, it was 45 minutes from where we were living. We now live on the farm. And so it was just building beds, shaping beds, getting things planted, reorienting the wash pack the way I think we should like it, repairing the broken high tunnel, covering with new plastic, those sort of things. And all in the preparation so that then for April of 24, we would hit the ground running with our first farmers market. And we were also, trying to put out feelers, trying to build some semblance of like on farm sales, sort of quasi CSA membership thing, as well as trying to connect with a couple of restaurants.
Okay. So equivalent for 4 months, you're working 2 full-time jobs just to get
Yeah,
this business up
basically.
and running. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you start your farmers markets. What are your most profitable crops? Looking back now, you've been a couple years into it. What are you saying? Hey, this is where I wish I had started, or this I did start with the right crops. If someone was going to start, where would you say what crops should they start with
So for
if they were in your area?
Yeah. So I would say being a market farm plays a big role because, you kind of know from reading things and talking to the growers and going to the market yourself, you can kind of see what people are selling and what they're selling a lot of. And obviously working for a farm who was a market farm, I could directly see like, what am I picking the most of? What is he selling the most of? And so number one by far is arugula. Arugula is our
Yeah.
number one most profitable farm. I would say it is about, just the arugula itself is probably right at about 10% of our annual revenue just in that one crop. And
Oh,
we're not even moving a particularly large amount of it. I would say it's like a modest amount compared to some other operations. Yeah, arugula, lettuce mix is another really big one. And,
okay.
it's probably coming in somewhere at like 8, 10, 8, 9%. And then
Okay.
broccolini is kind of our third most profitable. And obviously, these also are the highest selling items. The one item that sells higher than the broccolini, but isn't quite as profitable would be our carrots. And that's just the sheer amount of time and labor it takes. Carrots are finicky to germinate. They take a while to germinate. You got to weed them a lot. You have to harvest them. You have to bunch them. You have to wash them. And, for a big 3/4 pound bunch of carrots, you're getting the same price as you would for a 4/10 of a pound ish of broccolini. With the broccolini, you're planting it, you let it grow for a month and a half, 2 months, and then you're just picking it, every single week for months on end. But I would say between the arugula, the lettuce mix, and the broccoli, those are definitely our most profitable, and it makes up about a quarter of our sales every year.
Okay. All right. And how many beds, and I didn't have this question earlier written down, but how many beds are you running with for your production? You're working full time. How many beds are you turning over throughout the season? would you say?
So it's hard to say how many like bed flips we're doing because
Yeah,
obviously it varies a lot. You know, you have something like arugula that you're getting one cut and then you're turning it in and you're on to the next thing. And
replanting.
it might only be planted for a month in total, and you're sowing it every other week. Some people are sowing every week and things like that. Where then you have other things like, you know, green garlic or leeks or even some of our longer season brassicas where those beds might get planted twice in a season. But currently, right now, so we've grown exponentially. When we first started, I would say l- all the way up till the summer of 24. So like that first half of that first year, we had 16 100-foot beds and a 20 by 40-foot high tunnel, and that's all we had. And then we've just steadily grown. I had the whole farm mapped out. It's changed slightly over time as we've built another larger high tunnel, and so you kind of have to work around that. That's a big piece of constructed space that you can't really move, and it's not mobile. But more or less, the farm has been mapped out and has stayed the same as what it initially was in the winter of kind of 23, 24. So now we have 30, 3,800-foot beds with the small greenhouse, and then we have a 72-foot tunnel that has 7 72-foot beds in it. And
Okay.
we have and then we're gonna be adding 4 more 100-foot beds and 6 72-foot beds this spring, and that's gonna max us out. So we'll be like we've completely filled up our three-quarter acre spot, but that kinda gives you an idea of the amount of square footage that we're working with.
Okay. For those beds, do you do drip irrigation completely? Do you do some overhead irrigation? Just kind of an overview. What does your irrigation look like for that amount of area being irrigated?
Just about everything is on drip. Some beds have more than others. Some of it is just the nature of the economics of like, wow, we probably need to buy another roll of drip tape to be able to do all these beds, but this first planting is gonna be winter squash, so we'll just run one drip tape right up the middle and we'll do that. And then, hopefully by then we've got a little extra capital set aside. We can order in that second roll of drip tape, and then in several months when that squash comes out, they'll add the 2 other drip tape for the next planting of whatever goes in there next in the rotation. But yeah, everything's on drip, and then, we also work with the Sumi Soaker, a total
Yeah.
shameless plug,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
modern grower. It's been a wonderful tool. It's super modular. I'm probably actually gonna have to order another one, maybe 2 this year, just so that we have multiple ones. Because picking it up and moving it sometimes multiple times a day just isn't really cutting it. But for the most part, everything is being irrigated solely off of drip. It's just the most economic, way of doing it. Just open the open the spigot and just let it go for the particular zones and have a timer on your phone. And, one day we might have some fancy irrigation system that's all zoned out and, on a schedule, but, we're bootstrapping it. So
Right.
it is
Right.
what it is.
Exactly. You got to use what you got. Now, do you have any timers right now for certain areas, or are you manually going through at the moment?
We're pretty much manually going through it. I'm watering usually later in the day, sometimes just in the middle of the day as I have time. For me, the risk of a timer not going
Yeah.
like, not shutting the water off or
Right.
forgetting to run the water or having
Yeah.
to, like, slog back over to the farm at, 9 o'clock at night to cut the water off. I really hate doing that, and so I'd much rather, risk a little bit of evaporation by watering in the middle of the day. And so, more or less, I kinda know, "Alright, we haven't had any rain. I'm gonna be here for this many hours. Let's hit 3 or 4 zones today, and then we'll hit the other 4 zones tomorrow." But
Yeah.
we do have a couple of timers, the occasional thing where it's like, "I'm not gonna be able to get this done. Let me throw it on Saturday morning with the timer before I'm headed to the farmer's market, and I know it's not gonna run." But sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes that timer doesn't shut off or the battery
Right.
dies or whatever, and you come out the next morning, you're like, "Oh, wow, it's that
There's
I'm surprised there's still any water left in that well."
right. There's a river right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you do farmers markets. How many farmers markets are you doing? What would you say your sweet spot is? And are you selling in other ways as well?
So, we're just doing one market. and I would say that's the sweet spot. Um, since it's basically a solo operation, I know we'll kinda talk about employees and help in a little bit, but, with it essentially being a solo operation, you know, I can only spread myself so thin, and when most farmers markets are on Saturdays, you know, I'm not q I I'm in this weird in between point currently where it's like, we have the potential to grow significantly more than what this one farmer's market can hold. Now, granted, we're still new here. Our sales are sort of steadily trekking up, and I'm hoping that, as we're more established, we'll actually be able to generate more sales out of this particular market, but we have the potential to grow more than what this market can sell for us, but not quite enough to really, like, fully stock out 2 busy markets on a weekend. And so it's kind of a weird uncomfortable in between trying to push more
Mm,
restaurants, so on and so forth. But primarily, I've always just been a one market farm. We did one market in 24, and then we did our bigger market that we're not planning on leaving in 25, and we've toyed with the idea of potentially adding a midweek market this year, just depending on how sales go. There's only 1 or 2 that might really be worthwhile, because that's the other thing. A lot of the midweek markets might be cool and it might be an opportunity, but if it's not going to really generate the sales and it means it's another day away from my family, another day away from, being able to podcast and just not have to, harvest everything and drive it an hour and a half into Atlanta and then sit there for 4 hours. So a lot of those things are up in the air, but for the most part, we're doing, I would say, 80% of our business is retail at this one farmer's market, and then 20% is going to our restaurant wholesale accounts.
okay. So I've noticed we do a couple markets. Well, we do a few markets in the summer, and there's some that I've come out of because my revenue's not enough. What would you say someone's starting off? They're in the veg business. What would you say? Look, I'm not going to do this market for under this amount of revenue. This it wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't be worth my time, my gas, and the amount of time it's taking me to get ready for this market. What would you say your baseline limit is? Like, nope, we're not going to do this market if it's gonna not going to produce this level of revenue.
Yeah, I know for us, just sort of where we're at, we need to average, like, over a season, we need to average somewhere about 800 to 850 every week,
Okay,
in sales per week. And that's accounting for many days that are well over 1,000, and then several days that are gonna be, maybe,
less.
God forbid, a low 600s into the 7s, and it happens. You can't predict the weather. We have college football, it's crazy all the factors that there are. But I would say for us, 850 on average is sort of where, if it's dropping below that, we're seriously considering maybe we need to change. But I would say ideally, we try to shoot for $1,000 a week in sales. And that we know that if we're hitting that consistently most weeks, we can unforeseen expectations, those are unforeseen for a reason. But, with what our budgets are, with what our operating expenses are, we can make it at that price. But, everybody's a little different.
Right.
I'm really bootstrapping it. I don't have a delivery van. We have really good rent here. We tried to cut back on expenses as much as humanly possible. And so that's why we're able to hit those numbers. But then again, I have kids, I have a family. I'm not able
Hmm.
to work 100 hours a week.
Right.
And so I know I've talked to other growers on here who maybe they're single or their kids are moved out of the house and they're retired, or they've got a really good job and this is just on the side. And like for them, like if they make 300-400 bucks on a Saturday, like it's perfect. It's great. It's a little extra money in the pocket. It kind of covers the farm expenses and they're good. So everybody's a little different, but yeah, for us, it's kind of that 850 to 1,000 is really where we need to hit to
Mhm.
actually stay in business.
And have you ever tried a CSA model, or what's your opinion for your farm on CSA models? Is this a good idea for some of the extra product? Is there certain ways to work it that you would recommend?
I think it could be a fantastic idea. In this from experience, I tend to advise new farmers to shy away from it just because there's so much uncertainty in this business, especially starting out. When you don't have your processes scheduled out, or you don't know you haven't figured out all the tricks in this of like, hey, well, that third planting of brassicas in December, that really needs to go in the tunnel and not outside for extra vigor. There's so much little nuances of things, and if you have people that have paid ahead of time, or maybe they pay monthly, or they just anticipate having a weekly box, you have to be able to meet that week after week. Um, you know, you'll get some people that'll support you even if it's sporadic and maybe it's $50 worth of stuff this week and 30 next week and nothing for 3 weeks and then back to 50, and I've had a couple of people like that that I've worked with. But at the end of the day, it's just so sporadic. And we attempted to do that on a couple occasions. We had an online store. If anybody's listened to the podcast, we interviewed Grown By last year, and they've been great to work with. We've sort of moved away from that, like, online retail model, mostly just because our farmers market's been so great, we haven't had to. But, we were doing, like, a weekly veggie box, and then people could buy à la carte, and it kind of just became more of a hassle than it was worth. The sales weren't good enough for the amount of time it took to go in and update the website, and you'd forget to update inventory, and people are ordering tomatoes. You're like, crap, I haven't had
Oh,
tomatoes in 3 weeks.
oh
And,
yeah.
like, they just ordered 4 pounds of tomatoes, and so all that sort of stuff. So we moved away from that, and we attempted to kind of start a little home delivery CSA thing. And, just between the ebbs and the flows of what we had available, trying to keep it fresh, keep it different every week, not just load people up with, like, zucchini for, 6 weeks in a row for
Right.
summertime, and, just the natural demand of the farmer's market. We've sort of pulled back on that, but I think it could be good. I would just say, from my experience, that's really something that you should pull the trigger on once you really know what you're doing, and you know consistently, these are what my yields are gonna be week after week. This is what my planting schedule looks like. I have a bulletproof crop plan so that I can commit to doing this, because, yeah, that's what would happen. This family would order $50 worth of stuff every single week, and then it's like, "Hey, I'm a little slim this week," and, like, "That's fine, don't worry about it, we'll take a week off," and then the next week, and they're like, "Oh, well, we actually just grocery shop, so we don't," and then the next thing you know,
Yeah.
it's done. So, that's sort of my perspective as a new farmer on the CSA model.
It sounds like get your systems in place first, understand your systems, spend some time learning that, and then if you want to develop a CSA, it could be a good time
Yeah,
to do
and
that.
that's the beautiful thing about a farmer's market is, obviously, people come expectant to see certain things, but you can always just kinda cop out with the usual thing of like, "Oh, sorry, I sold out already." Like, "Oh, wow, I
Right.
can't believe you already sold out of,
Yep.
broccolini." Or like, "Well, yeah, it's 'cause I had 40 bunches last week and I only had 10 this week." And so,
Yeah.
but there's no expectation. Nobody's pre-ordered anything.
Right.
It's first come, first serve, and so maybe you have a lot of arugula this week and none next week, and because of that, because there's other growers there, there's way less expectation on what you need to bring. And if you have a slow week, you have a slow week, and if you have a lot of stuff, hopefully you sell a lot of stuff. And so the farmers market is very, very forgiving for the new grower.
Yeah. You got a large amount of beds that you're organizing and flipping, and you've got your hoop house greenhouse as well. How do you keep that organized? Do you use an Excel spreadsheet? Do you have a certain program?
I don't really keep it very well organized, if I'm being honest. I'm trying to implement, and this is actually a conversation I just had with my wife just a couple of days ago. I made the mistake starting off because we started off so small and we just sort of grew incrementally. Literally, we would grow like a bed at a time as we
Yeah.
could. Because of that, there hasn't been a great system to what gets planted where when. And so, like, I'm thinking of, we have like empty bed, cilantro, carrot, lettuce, kale, collard, kale, cabbage. It's like, all right, so there's a block of brassicas. Okay, great. And then it's like more carrots, onions, green garlic. So there's a lot of variation in what we're doing. And so I'm using some online tools. I kind of use Seed Time because it's
Okay.
free,
Yeah.
to sort of build my planting schedule. It's just a good way for me to visualize it and see it. Spreadsheets are a little hard for me to kind of build out of nowhere, and then
Yeah.
otherwise you're using somebody else's spreadsheet, and then your brain doesn't work the way theirs does, so sometimes that can be even more complicated. I mean, it's a lot of, like, literally drawing maps on pieces of paper, like, "All right, block C with these 8 beds, that's what is gonna go in there," and so it's like a combination of just drawing it out to see it,
Yeah.
using seed time, and then having, like, a planting journal. So I'm, like, taking field notes and knowing all that. And for better or for worse, it's a lot of just intuition, thinking like, "All right, I've got these things in the seed house. What needs to go out first? What's gonna be the highest priority?" Knowing your market, knowing timing. I probably should rely less on that and really see my crop plan as sort of my Bible to go off of, but, I'm trying to get better at that. We have a lot of empty beds right now to start to free up several blocks so that we can start planting blocks at a time, and that'll definitely help my brain figure everything out a little bit better. But, yeah, I haven't done a great job up until this point with that.
It can be difficult for sure. How many hours would you say, I want to start a farm? How many hours a week am I working in the summertime, like your really busy time, your shoulder seasons, and maybe your winter time? What would you say average hours for those shoulder seasons? I'll go ahead, in the summer and then in the winter per week.
Yeah, I would say starting in the summertime, I mean, we're pushing 60, 70 hours in the summertime. I mean, it's, make hay while the sun is
Yeah.
shining, man.
Right.
If it's sun's up at 6 and doesn't go down till 9, like it's hard to not be out there and be doing something. But then you also have bookkeeping and farmers markets and like I always tend to forget Saturdays in my like how many hours did I work this week sort of internal monologue. And, for some reason, it's like Saturday doesn't count as a work day, even though it's like one of the hardest days of the
Hardest
week.
days. Right.
Most days I don't come home and feel like I need to take a nap, but you do on Saturdays. But yeah, I would say summertime, it's easy 60, 65,
6, 7.
and then shoulder seasons, it might drop to 50. And then this time of year, yeah, if we hit 40, in the wintertime where it was a busy week. And part of that is just the nature of we have less daylight. Obviously, I have
Yeah.
a little more daylight down here than you do, but also I'm trying to give myself a break.
Yeah.
I could be out here from sunup to sundown, which isn't super long. I could, but it's like this is a better time to take some breaks, spend some time with friends, take a long lunch break with my kids and just hang out,
Right.
because dad's not going to be around much in the summertime. And so, yeah, I mean, so there can be a big swing. It can be as little as like 30 hours some weeks in the wintertime to, yeah, like 65, 70 if we've got a big project or a lot that we're having to harvest. If you were to break it down day to day, obviously try not to work on Sundays. We do end up doing a little bit of work anyways. There's always something that needs to be watered or picked or whatever. And then, beginning of the week is usually a little bit more slower working on some stuff, getting restaurant orders together and delivered. And then as it's sort of like as the week, marches towards the farmer's market, it gets bigger and bigger to where usually most Fridays are 10, 12-hour days, just about no matter what time of the year it is. It's just the nature
Yeah.
of I'm trying not to pick stuff too early. And, a lot of stuff gets picked and then you've got to bag it, you've got to bunch it, you got to get everything ready. And inevitably, even when I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm almost done, like that's sort of my famous phrase. Like I'll come home for dinner on Friday and be like, oh, I'm almost done. I mean, Sarah's like, you say that every week and then I won't
Right.
see you for 2 more hours. Yeah. And so inevitably, Fridays are always usually, yeah, that's usually like start it. Sometimes they're 14-hour days, sometimes it's you're out there at 7 and you don't get home till 9, and then you gotta get up in the morning, but that's sort of the rough breakdown of what my kind of work
Okay.
schedule looks like.
Okay. I think you need that break in the winter time. When I talk to a
Mhm.
lot of farmers or some who say, "Well, I'm going to do this other job all winter long," and I allow, but then they get burned out and their farm is done after a couple years because they're working double full time.
Yeah.
Working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I'm sure if you calculate some of yours, like if you calculated Saturday, you'd be like, "Oh, gee, I'm at 80 hours a week this week." In the summer, you got to have that time to reset in the wintertime and refocus too on your farm and see what works and what doesn't. Which kind of brings me into bookkeeping. How do you handle that? Do you yourself do all the bookkeeping? Do you have an accountant that you use for part of it? What would you say? Like, how do you keep all your expenses and then your revenue all recorded.
Pretty much just use QuickBooks. I feel like with our business, it always feels like we're in this weird in between where we're not really small enough to just kind of like back the napkin sort of math, just really, really bootstrap it anymore. And but I also really struggle to take the plunge and pay for things like hiring an accountant, to regularly do that.
Yeah.
If we had employees regularly and a lot of those sort of expenses, then I probably would. But because it's just me, so it and like I can more or less keep up with like what's going in and what's coming out. And I'm directly handling all the sales every single week. I don't feel the need to really have all that being sort of quote unquote babysat for me.
Mhm.
And so paying $30 a month for QuickBooks, it tracks my mileage, it tracks my invoicing. I can do all that from my phone and then I can go on the computer and then, I can tie and then all that QuickBooks stuff can either go into TurboTax if I did my taxes myself but then ultimately it can like go to the CPA to handle all your tax stuff. And so I mean for us that's been the best $30 a month we've ever spent. I can keep up with all that, and everything, the bank account and Square and QuickBooks all integrate together perfectly. And so
Okay.
kind of between those 3 things, using Square to kind of track sales trends, and then obviously using QuickBooks for like expenses and sort of and then obviously the invoicing, wholesale side of the business, and
Mhm.
and then using the bank account as more of the money management, if that makes sense. So it's like QuickBooks is really more about tracking, and then obviously
Mhm.
we're receiving some payment in the wholesale side, Square for handling all point of sale retail sales,
Okay.
and then actually moving money around, putting it in, having multiple accounts within the bank account for operating expenses, uh, you know, investment fund or, expense account, profit, all that sort of stuff. So I kind of have those 3 different spheres where I'm managing sort of the finances of the business in that way.
Okay. No, that's very cool. That sounds very smart. So QuickBooks, and then you use a Square for point of sale, and then you've got your banks. You got your bank account, but you got your bank account split into different areas. So you've kind of got
Yeah,
that organized
so
for.
just to kind of explain that, what I mean by that is, like, so I have in my particular bank, um, I guess I could shout it out in, Novo Bank if you want, shoot me a DM and I can send you a referral code, we can each get a little bit of money. But, it's, they're an online based business banking account. It's really great. It's free. But, you have the opportunity to set up like reserve accounts. So I have it to
Okay.
where 10% of all revenue that comes in gets allocated into an expense account for next year's operating expenses.
Oh, cool.
So
Okay.
so it's kind of like I'm taking 10% off the top of everything and it's getting set aside, so, we've got roughly, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's like we have like a full expense account, not totally full, but a full expense account to buy seed and fertilizer and all that
Yeah.
stuff for 26 already. And plus we have all of our normal operating money from in the regular like standard checking account to continue to pay bills. And so it's a quasi savings account slash, so when we make big purchases, we know that we've got that 3, 4, 5 grand sitting there that we can pull out of, and it's not gonna
Mm.
be like, "Oh, we gotta," sometimes you're doing the dance of like, "Well, rent's due, but then we've gotta make this big purchase," and then,
Right.
whatever, whatever. So I have, like, separate accounts for that, and then we have our separate reserve account that's just kind of like our personal expenses as well.
Okay. Man, that's a great organization, I think. Haven't thought of it exactly that way before. So that's awesome. When you consider profitability, like, do you pay yourself first, and then you say profit after that, or do you look at profitability before you pay yourself? If you know what I'm asking a
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
I definitely don't pay myself. I probably should. It's more or less like, what do we need to live? Like,
Okay.
what sort of things like, we have it broken down. These things get covered with my wife's income. These things get covered with the farm income, and,
Mhm.
and they come out of the farm account, go into the personal account, and get handled that way.
Yeah.
And so I can see what I'm quote unquote paying myself, but it's not really like I'm paying myself this like flat salary every single month or week, and then whatever I have left is what the business has to operate. The business operation takes number one priority right off the
Mhm.
top. And so, yeah, profitability is kind of not really determined until the end of the season. We can really see like um I mean, I have some rough ideas as we're going along. I know how much things are gonna cost. I know roughly how much is coming in, so you can kind of do that quick math. But to actually see, like, what did we actually make this year? It really comes down to doing the books at the end of the year. Like, all right, well, we did about 50,000 in sales, but expenses when everything was all done, it was like, oh, that was like 43. So it's like, great, we made $7,000 this year. Fantastic. I'm rich. But obviously, as you probably know, and other farmers do, a lot of our life is expensed.
Yeah.
Truck, you know, a lot of rent, a lot
Yep.
of certain utility things, all of that is considered expenses. So, so the profitability thing is a weird one for me because it's like,
Mhm.
all right, if I was working at any other job, these 5 things would not be these would just be, like, coming out of my pay every single week, and it's just, like, getting thrown at those things, and it's just the cost of living. But now, now those things are expenses, and now I can write those off on my taxes, and it kind of doesn't go against my profitability. So, that's just I mean, that's the nature of running
Yep.
your own business.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, we go to some conferences every year, and those conferences we expense out because we go to agricultural conferences, and then we expense a lot of that, but it's also an area where we can vacation a little bit. So it just kind of balances that out a little bit. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Like we could do property taxes, cell phones, well, part of your cell phones, part of your electricity, your truck. There's so much you can expense out. Um, yeah, it's really hard to put a number on that. I guess trying to put a number on it, if you're looking at your gross income and then you're looking at your direct expenses to produce those crops, instead of, maybe not, I'm reinvesting into another high tunnel and it's costing me another 15 grand in this high tunnel, maybe taking that out of the picture and just looking at your direct expenses of directly producing the crops to your gross income. What would you say your balance would be in that? Would you say I wanted 50%, 40% expenses
Hmm.
for direct?
Yeah, that's tough because it's hard to know what. 'Cause it's almost like the expenses get broken down into so many different categories, like
Right.
within
Yeah.
QuickBooks to kinda know, like, what's an ongoing regular expense. It's like, alright, so we have, like, kind of a tools category. Sometimes it's, obviously, it's just, like, hard tools that might get purchased once every 5, 6 years. Um, and then there's things like gas that are gonna get purchased every single week, or something like seeds that might only get purchased 2 or 3 times a year. Um so yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna totally cop out and say, like, I have
Yeah.
no idea. I would say it's probably, uh, yeah, it's probably more like, if I'm being, totally honest, it's probably somewhere in the, like, 30% range,
Yeah.
realistically. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I think that's no, it's a really hard question. I just look at mine and right now I haven't done this year's, but last year's I think it was close to 40%, and I'm like, that's not good."
Yeah.
But it's actually not. It depends. What else are you expensing out, right? Like you were saying. Um, so it's kinda looking at that, but yeah. Yeah, no, I got you.
And sometimes with those expenses, we're intentionally spending things. I spent $900 on seed on December 29th this year,
Yeah.
strategically, and so it's like, yeah, with all of that sort of stuff, even the way that we spend our money, we're always trying to look like we have way less profit than we do to lower our tax burden. It's just the nature of running a business. So some of those things can always be a little tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I talked to a farmer who puts money from the farm into a retirement account, which he can legally do. And so he's like, so I put some of my profits there and it's not taxable. So it's just really cool just figuring out ways. to 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 work it, and it's beneficial. So, and we were talking. Let's talk a little bit about. So we went through that. Let's talk a little bit about you hiring. So you're doing everything. I mean, you're really just bootstrapping this farm. You're
Yeah.
working your butt off all summer, and throughout the year as well. What are you looking at for the next year or next couple years? How are you looking to expand, or are you looking to maintain? Are you happy where you're at and this is perfect? Let's keep it here, or are you thinking about, no, I want to expand? What's your goal?
I mean, I definitely want to expand, not necessarily like, "Oh, I wanna grow on more property." It's more of like, wanna be more profitable, at the end of the I wanna increase sales, ideally, we're increasing sales and sort of streamlining the business at the same time, so they can have more money in our pocket. There's always things you wanna go on. I'd love to be able to take my kids on an actual vacation, um, one year. Things like that, and just it just takes more money to do it, and so definitely wanting to sort of grow the business in that sense, sort of like the yearly revenue, and the profit. Um, but I'm pretty happy with sort of the amount of space that we have. It's honestly probably too much for one person, and it's probably given me the freedom to be a little bit sloppier than I should be, but we attempted to have an employee, and I think honestly, it just didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to, and I honestly chalk most of that up to me. I wasn't a very good manager, wasn't a very good boss, I wasn't doing my due diligence of making sure that that person had, like, a consistent job to do every day that they were there and this and that, and so um, I think for 26 and moving forward, the goal is just, like, let's get I was actually had a conversation with another farmer on the phone yesterday about this. Like, I need to get my processes down. I need to have, like, a bulletproof crop plan. I need to know exactly how much it's gonna cost, things like fertilizer, compost, seeds every year. Like, I need to know exactly what my operating costs are gonna be consistently, because we're only 2 years in, and we've been growing, and so it's like things
Mhm.
are getting more expensive. We're spending more on all of these sort of things,
Right.
and sometimes we're overspending on this and realize, like, "Wow, we wasted," like, "I've wasted so much money on microgreens," and we're pulling all that way back to really kind of fine tune all that sort of stuff. So there's still a lot of, like, waste and spoilage within the business, and so for me, my goal is to just, like, I need to refine my processes. I need to become a better grower overall, before I ever really consider, like, having a crew of people, um, or really expanding the business, you know, much more beyond
Mhm.
just me. Just because otherwise I'm just gonna be growing in a really sloppy way, and, it won't work out that way. Like, it won't be sustainable, just you're almost, like, trying to build as you go in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. It's like, let's put the next level on right before we're about to climb to that next level, and, unfortunately, that's kind of how we've grown up until this point, and I think, I'm a good farmer, I'm a good salesman, a good dose of luck and blessing and all that has got us to where we are, but now it's time to really, like, refine the processes and build a much more sustainable, better business, and then hopefully, in the future, we can when it's time to expand kind of the crew, so to speak, that we're able to, do it effectively and not just throw someone out there and hope that it works out, and just give them something to do and keep them going and hope that it generates profitability for the business instead of just like, "Well, it's nice to have somebody to talk to."
Right. Right. I feel like management of employees is a really difficult thing to master, and I'm
Yeah.
definitely learning that as well. But I like how you're saying, like, we need to get the processes down pat, so when the employees are coming in or in the morning, you can be like, "This is exactly what we need, but this is how I can teach you to do that as well."
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
imagine like learning how to be a chef and then opening a restaurant and trying to manage a kitchen full of people. Like while
Oh,
you're
yeah.
also learning how to cook food.
Be a
Like
chef. Right.
and it's like that's what I'm still learning how to be a farmer. I do not
Right.
know hardly anything how to be a farmer in the grand scheme of things. And then also then like trying to bring someone alongside of me to teach, even if they're not going to be a farmer ultimately, like they're farming, they're working with me, and so it's like like the blind leading the blind, and it's just, yeah, it's just not a sustainable model, and I need to try to grow the best I can, and once I've reached like the outermost limits of like I cannot grow anymore by myself, and if I don't feel like that's good or I need to expand or increase revenue, then we can, then hopefully then we can effectively add some people on in a better way.
So, coming kind of wrapping this up a little bit, and we kind of dove into it a decent amount just now, about some things you would change. What if a new farmer comes to you and says, "I'm going to start the farm"? What are some things you would do a little bit differently that you would recommend he do that maybe you did and you realized it wasn't the best plan right from the get go?
I'd say number one, it's try and balance your soils. Try to nail fertility and, first thing before you ever really consider putting anything in the ground to sell. That's
Okay.
way easier said than done. But we were throwing in beds with a basic NPK test and like, we'll do some compost because that's what everybody does, and we'll throw some fertilizer in there, and then it's like make a bed, plant it, make a bed, plant it, make a bed, plant. That's literally what we were doing. And still to this day, like I'm still reaping the consequences of that, where it's like we still have soils that are unbalanced. We still have patches. Now, granted, I understand that you're always working to build soil, and I mean, it's even though we're trying to be ecological and we're trying to be regenerative, we're still extracting things from the soil. I mean, that's just the nature of not everything's a cover crop. Like you got to pull something out of the ground, and you're pulling out some of the nutrient. Now, hopefully, you're building some microbial stuff in the soil to sort of kind of keep that carbon cycle going, and it's replenishing itself in some form or fashion. But for the most part, like you're always going to be building soil, but we really did a poor job of building our, like, initial fertility before we really got going, and then once we started expanding, we did an even poorer job because then we're like, we don't even have time to apply compost, so at least before we were, like, applying a little bit of fertilizer with, like, an insufficient amount of testing, and, but at least we're adding compost to those beds, and now it's like we're adding fertilizer with insufficient with maybe slightly better testing, but we're just putting fertilizer in, we're, like, working it in, and then boom, we're planting, and then, 3 successions later, like, "Oh, this bed is just," "Oh, it's such a piss poor production on that bed," and so, I would say, like, my number one thing is, like, your soil is it's your reserve account, like, that's what you're pulling from, that's your bank account, and, just like you need capital to operate your business, you have to have good, healthy soil to start off with. Like, so ideally, I wish I would have had, I wish I would have leased our property in July and had like a full end of summer, fall to really build our beds, get them amended well, get another test in, and see what we're working with so that when we start planting in the spring, we were better set up. And I'm, doing my best to not make those continued mistakes. But yeah, that would be my number one thing. And then also I would say try to have some sales outlets in place. I think a lot of
Okay.
times people think, yeah, I gotta be able to grow stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but then you gotta be able to sell it. Like you have
Right.
to, it's great that you grow the most beautiful tomatoes in the world, but if nobody's gonna buy them and you don't have anybody to sell them to, you just have a really awesome garden. And
Right.
so spending winter months knocking on doors to chef, hopefully maybe you have a little bit, maybe you have a couple of beds that you can throw some arugula in or some lettuce. And even if it's not like this is going to be a full planting, but like you kind of have some like test plots so that you can take some stuff to a chef, let them try it, feed a couple of people that maybe might be potential customers for a veggie box a week, or to be able to go to a farmer's market and see what a bunch of carrots looks like, and I got 5 carrots, and that's $5, so, and I know that I can yield that much, being able to have some ideas on, like, a farmer's market or restaurant accounts or a wholesaler that you're gonna be selling to, having those sort of things in place, and that's tough because a lot of times
Mhm.
you're trying to sell the potential of something as opposed to
Right.
like, and now I can go into a restaurant and it's like, I can do this much every single week. I'll add you to my list. Here's my prices. It's cut and dry. But if you got good stuff and you're really passionate about it and they like you, a lot of times they'll stick with you. I've got chefs that tell me all the time, like, dude, I just like you, man. Like, I could buy from other people, but I just like working with you. And I'm like, okay, well, I wish it was the vegetables. It was like you have the best carrots in the entire area, and I couldn't imagine buying carrots from anybody else because yours are just the absolute best. But I guess I'll settle for like you're a cool guy and I like you, so I want you to succeed. So I'll help in whatever way I can.
Yeah, but I think you take it as like you go to 2 burger restaurants and one has super awesome staff and the other doesn't. Same burger, but that other burger is just absolutely amazing, right? You wanna create the best product you can, but people want that experience and they want that personal relationship, and I think, like, that's, obviously what you provide, and I think that's super important. So, well, Alec, thanks a lot. I know this was kind of a little backwards, on the
No, it's
podcast,
fun.
but
It's nice to just get to talk. I didn't have to prep anything other than, like, looking over your questions. Like,
yeah.
this was like a vacation for me, man. And now, yeah, I mean, I went from doing the podcast with Diego where it's like I was the main focus and I was doing all the talking, and then now I'm, like, asking questions and letting other people talk, and I
Right,
miss
right.
talking. So, no, this was fun. This is
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
It was great. You're doing amazing things, down there in Georgia, and, man, thanks for taking the time for letting me pick your brain a little bit and learn more about what you're doing and also learn more about how other people can start their own organic farms and really build this movement.
Yeah, and best of luck with, your garlic paradise and with your, conference presentation.
All right.
I look forward to maybe hearing the audio from it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Alec.
Big thank you to Chet for willing to, record what didn't have to be an episode, but he was totally cool to play ball and to do that with me. That was really fun. I always like to get to talk more, and hopefully, maybe you guys got a little bit of a taste of what it might be like if you heard me on someone else's podcast. So, if there is a podcast out there, whether it's farming or culture and lifestyle, parenting, whatever it may be, if you think that our content and my story is applicable to another show that you love to listen to, please either let me know so I can reach out to the host of that show or reach out to them and suggest that they have us on. I'm always looking to promote the show and get our content out to new audiences. And frankly, I just love to talk. I guess technically now I'm kind of paid to talk in some sort of a way. This is part of my profession. So if you do have someone else that you think would love to hear our story and you'd love to hear us on somewhere else, please get us in contact. Maybe CC me in an email with them if they have an email contact, just cropculturefarm@gmail.com. Love to make that connection and love to spread the message of the Rookie Farmer podcast anywhere else that it can be heard. And a huge thank you, as always, to Diego and the whole team over at Modern Grower for making the show possible. None of this would be able to happen without you guys. And if you need things like the Sumi Soaker, the Jang Seeder, Paper Pot Transplanter that started it all, and so much more, go over to shop.moderngrower.co. All of the tools over there are the absolute best, top notch in the industry. I use them every single day. And I wouldn't be able to be a very successful farm without those tools. So if you're looking to take your farm to the next level, if you're looking to upgrade equipment or just upgrade your farming ability, these tools and this kit can really help. And if you want, you can use our affiliate link in the description, and every purchase that you make through that link will actually kick back a little bit of money our way. So you're indirectly helping the show. And with indirectly helping the show, you can directly help the show because we believe in value for value. So if you are getting value out of this content, if breaking down the numbers and the processes and all of the things that we talk about in these episodes, please consider taking that value and turning it around and sending it back our way in the form of a donation. You can go to Cash App, Venmo, or PayPal, and you can look for Crop Culture Farm or at Crop Culture Farm, and you can send us $1, $5, $1,000. Maybe you're one of those people that just won that gigantic Powerball lottery, and you want to help support small and up and coming farm agriculture media. That would be super awesome. We would definitely give you the biggest shout out on the show. We'd probably even bring you on if you wanted to talk. But anyways, I digress. please consider helping us with this show. We're looking to expand, we're looking to change our podcast studio, and that's going to take new Wi-Fi, new cameras, all that sort of stuff. We really want to make the show as top-notch and professional as the way that people listen and the way that people watch changes. We want to be able to adapt and address those sort of things. And sometimes that takes a little bit of extra finances to do so. So every little bit that you guys give to the show is greatly appreciated. And if you have a question or a comment that you can attach to that donation, and I will happily read it out on the show, answer your questions, and maybe even ask a future guest that question. And once again, you have been listening to the Rookie Farmer podcast. If you would like to know more about the show, you can find us on Instagram at Rookie Farmer Podcast, or you can find me at Crop Culture Farm on Instagram. I think we're on Twitter or X. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, on the Modern Grower YouTube channel. Anywhere that you can find all of our content, we'd love a follow. We'd love to engage with you directly. But until next time, I've been your host, Alex Smith, and blessings and peace.